Hello and welcome to this class guide for Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. I'm Emerging Boat, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Silent Knife. This is the first class guide that I'm doing. I'm doing these guides iteratively as I retire the classes in my playthrough that I'm doing on YouTube. So as I retire more classes, I will be doing class guides for more characters. In this case, I've played the Silent Knife up through technically level 6, although I only did one scenario where I was level 6, so mostly it's level 5. But I have some background with Gloomhaven 1st Edition, Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, Frosthaven, Crimson Scales, Gloomhaven Digital, a little bit of Frosthaven Digital. So even though I haven't played this class through level 9, I should be able to provide you some insight into how it works. The way this video is going to be structured is that I'm going to talk about an overview of the class. From there, we are going to get into the card breakdown. So we're going to go through all the level 1 cards, all the level X cards, and then we're going to progress through each of the level ups, talking about what choices you have at each level up, why you might take a specific card over another at each level up. After that, we will talk about perks and the order that you might want to take perks, or at least the order that I recommend taking those perks. And then finally, we will take a look at the solo item as well. So let's get right into it. The Silent Knife is a low complexity 9-card class. You can see on the back here of the character board, we have a bit of an overview. They have very high bars for the melee, the range, the mobility, and they have low bars for support, defense, and control. This is a class that wants to be doing damage, and it is really damn good at it. As you level up, you're going to be generally making choices between if you want to be dealing more melee damage or more range damage. If you go down the melee damage path, you're generally going to be dealing single target damage that's higher value attacks. If you go into the ranged build, then you'll be dealing more attacks to more enemies, but they're going to be smaller attacks. But I was going to say they should be able to equal out and about damage, but that may not necessarily be true just depending on how you play them, but they can both deal a lot of damage. Just because this class is considered low complexity does not mean it is nerfed or bad or bad, like just any kind of bad. It is very, very good. Some other things that this class is really good at that is not indicated by the chart down here at the bottom is that, number one, it has really good initiative control, meaning it has cards that are both very fast in initiative, i.e. they are low in initiative number, and slow in initiative. So by doing that, you can weave your initiative from going very slow one round to going very fast in another, and basically getting 2 turns in before a monster gets a turn in. So as I refer to initiative weaving, that is the strategy that I'm talking about. It's a very effective strategy for trying to avoid attacks and damage from monsters, and the Silent Knife doesn't have a small health pool per se, but they really want to be getting out of the way of monster attacks because they don't really have a lot of ways to mitigate damage otherwise. Let's flip this board over and take a look at some of the other mechanics that this class has. I mentioned that you can be dealing a lot of damage. However, you're not just going to just be dealing raw damage. You're going to have to set up a little bit of planning in order to meet the requirements to deal the maximum amount of damage for your really high damage dealing cards. And typically those bonuses are going to come from one of 2 things. Number one, either an enemy is adjacent to one of your allies, or the enemy is adjacent to none of their own allies. Meaning one or both of those conditions can often mean that your attacks are going to be stronger, so you want to be able to set up things to do that. You are going to get tools to be able to help set those things up as well. You're not going to get a lot of them, but you will have tools to help make that stuff happen. This is important to consider when you are figuring out what party composition you're going to have with the Silent Knife. Sometimes you're not going to have a choice with that. You're just going to be picking the Silent Knife and they're just going to blend right into your party and you're not going to give much thought to it. But if you are starting off with this class, the class can go really well with pretty much any of the other starting classes, but the one composition I might recommend against would be the Silent Knife as a 2-party with just the Spellweaver. That can be a little tough because the Silent Knife really does like having another melee character in their party. And if you just have the Spellweaver does not like to be in melee distance, melee range to other enemies. So that might be a little tough, but you can still make it work. You may not be able to play on higher difficulties, but you can absolutely still make it work if you need to. We already touched on the fact that this is a 9-card class, so as noted on the character board, you do have to be very judicious with when you play lost cards. This class cannot really afford to play lost cards early I will caveat that with the fact that I will make an argument to play a lost card early in a much later level up, so we will get to that. But you only have 9 cards. You're going to have lower endurance compared to most classes in Gloomhaven, which typically have an average of like a 10 card hand. So compared to a 10 card class, you're going to be getting 5 rounds less out of your total endurance than that 10 card class. I mentioned the fact that you can have kind of melee builds, ranged builds. I will say that you do not have to feel like you are only trapped into just doing melee or just doing ranged. Especially at level 1, you are mostly going to be doing melee, but you're going to have some ranged tools in your toolkit, some ranged attacks. You can choose how much you want to spec into each of those specialties as you want. For instance, with I'll say my level 5 Silent Knife, I mostly did melee damage. I mostly wanted to be a single target damage dealer that just focused down individual enemies. However, there were some cards that I took during level ups that were generally meant for more ranged attacks, more ranged builds. And I had a lot of fun doing that. I still felt very effective. I felt like I was just kind of like adding different tools to my toolkit. So don't feel trapped in that you have to pick melee or ranged. You can specialize in one completely, or you can do a little bit of mixing of each. With that, let's start getting into the cards. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do the level 1 cards and then the level X cards, and then we'll do the level ups. I'm going to generally be doing these in increasing initiative order just because that's how I usually organize my cards in my hand anyway, and so that will give some sense of order into how we're going through these cards as we're looking at them. Our first card that we're going to look at is Flanking Strike. The top action is an attack 3 with subtext of add +2 attack and gain 1 experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. The bottom action is a move 5, and this is all at initiative 4. This is a fantastic card. This is an early staple card. Low levels, like I said, you're mainly going to be doing melee damage. If you want to continue just focusing on melee targets, melee damage, you are going to continue keeping this card in your hand for quite a while. Both halves of this card are just great. Being able to do an attack 5 and gain an experience is phenomenal. A move 5 is great. It's a non-loss move 5. A lot of classes do not have moves this big at level 1 that are non-loss. You, on the other hand, will have plenty of large moves. You're also going to have crazy initiatives. Initiative 4 is super low. It's super fast. You're not going to be slower than many monsters when you play this card. There are a couple of monster ability cards that can beat this initiative, but they are very few and far between. You want to try to avoid playing the top action as just an attack 3. You really want to be setting it up so that the monster is adjacent to one of your allies. Because an attack 3 on a 9 card class is just not that great, but an attack 5 is excellent. Next up, we have Venom Shiv. The top action of this is an attack 3, Pierce 1, and Poison. The bottom action is add Pierce 2 to all your range attacks this round, and it obviously lasts for the entire round, and the initiative is 8. This is a very good card to pull in when you're going to be dealing with a lot of shielded enemies in a scenario. I think the top action is just okay. Attack 3, Pierce 1, Poison. The Poison can be nice for increasing your party's damage on a shielded enemy. It is only one of 2 ways that you have of level 1 of being able to apply Poison consistently. At least from your cards, that is. However, the bottom action of this, I think, is excellent. I use this card many times, especially at lower levels, because Pierce 2 can often just go through all shields that you have on enemies at low levels. This card will pair very nicely with the next card that we're talking about. But keep in mind that this bottom ability only applies to ranged attacks. I really like this card overall. I think if you start speccing into more ranged attacks, you're going to continue bringing this card into your hand, not all the time, but it'll get into your hand more regularly than if you spin into a more melee-focused build. For meleeers, this card will probably get cut somewhat quickly because attack 3, Pierce 1, it just doesn't do as much damage as other attacks. The Pierce 1 is okay, but not really enough to warrant me saying, oh yeah, I want to include this in my hand. But at early levels, you might still use that top action. Next, we have Throwing Knives. The top action is attack 2, target 2 at range 3, and gain an experience. The bottom action is a pull 2 at range 3, and this is all at initiative 10. This is, to me, a phenomenal card. I love both halves of this card. The top action of this is going to pair super well with the bottom action of this, because being able to do an attack 2, target 2 is okay on its own, but if you're doing attack 2, target 2, and you're doing pierce 2 and getting through the shields of some of those shielded enemies on things like forest imps, for instance, living spirits, for instance, you could potentially be taking out some low-level shielded enemies very quickly. This is also one of the only, one of 2, I think, ranged cards that you're going to get at level 1. So if you're trying to figure out if you want to be playing a ranged build, this is a good card just to be able to experiment with and have that top action of playing those ranged attacks. It is a total of 4 damage spread across 2 enemies, which is obviously less than 5 damage that's only focused on 1 enemy. But the Silent Knife does have an amazing attack modifier deck. It's going to take you a couple of levels, a couple of perks to be able to get your attack modifier deck to be great. But over time, I think the ranged build, because it's doing multi-targeted attacks, it has a higher potential to outpace the single target build in terms of just raw damage. But speaking of melee, the bottom action of this is phenomenal for melee. I talked about tools that you're going to have that are going to allow you to get enemies either adjacent to your allies or adjacent to none of their own allies. And this is one of those tools. Pull 2 at range 3 is a great amount of forced movement. There's going to be a number of scenarios early on in the campaign where this can just result in you super early being able to pull an enemy through a trap next to you, next to an ally, and you just being able to do a high-powered attack. And so you've done direct damage from the trap, you are doing a high-powered attack, and you might just be killing that enemy straight off the bat at initiative like 10 or 4 or something like that. It's fantastic. Like the direct damage you can do from traps or hazardous terrain through something like a pull is where you really need to that's where you need to consider a lot of the value from these pulls. They help to power up your attacks themselves, but they also can be doing direct damage, bypassing shields, which is just phenomenal. It doesn't help as much against flying enemies, for instance, but even then it can still just help set up your other attacks that have requirements for positioning. Anyway, Throwing Knives, outstanding card, great card, love it for both halves. Moving on. Quick Hands, top action is Loot 1 with another ability of Move 2. The bottom action is Attack 3, Gain 1 in Experience, and this is at Initiative 23. There are some classes who would kill to have an Initiative 23 card. You, on the other hand, view this as somewhat of a mediocre initiative. It's not bad, but it's definitely not something that can guarantee that you're going to go before all monsters. The top action of this is fine. It's okay. Just because it's a 9-card class. I think a Loot 1, Move 2 is a top action. Again, many classes would kill for this. However, you only being a 9-card class, so many of your top actions you want to be using for dealing damage. That's not going to be true all the time. You're going to have dead rounds where you may not be needing to deal the damage. And so in this case, you could spend an action to do a Loot 1, Move 2 instead. But depending on what card that you take at level 2, you might have a better option that you want to be playing during quote-unquote dead rounds. If you're going to bring this card with you in a scenario, I think the real reason that you want to bring this is for that bottom action, the Attack 3. Attack 3 is not great for a top action by itself for your class, but an Attack 3 on a bottom action is fantastic. We love that. Having attacks on the bottom are rare. It's similar to having movements on the top action of a card. It is somewhat rare. So when you see those things, you should kind of draw your attention to the card to really figure out like how can it change the way that you're playing a class? How can it affect how you're comboing cards together? And in this case, I would look at that as Attack 3 as it's going to help you burst your damage much more quickly, because if you do initiative weaving, you can go late in a round, move up to an enemy and do a top attack. And then the next round you can go early and maybe pair this with something like Flanking Strike. And in that case, you're now doing an Attack 5 gaining experience and then an Attack 3 gaining experience, and you can really just melt an enemy very quickly. You will have to be a little bit cautious of that, because if you decide to do that, you are now going to be vulnerable. You're not going to have movement to be able to get out of that position. So you have to make sure that you are in a safe spot, that you're not going to take a ton of attacks. But it is a strategy that you can do to really whittle down some of those really beefy enemies. Our next card is Special Mixture. Top action is Heal 3 Self and Infuse Dark. Bottom action is Move 3 and then Poison 1 enemy at range 1. And then this is all at Initiative 33. I am admittedly not the biggest fan of this card because I don't think either action is that great. The top action being a heal 3 self, that can be good. There can be cases where it's nice for you to be able to say, don't worry, I can take care of myself, I can heal myself up. But you're a class that's not generally going to be trying to take a lot of damage. If you happen to take an attack that has wound on it, this card is probably going to be the most effective thing because then you can just clear that wound off of yourself. But hopefully you're not going to be taking a lot of attacks. And if you are, then maybe you have an ally that can heal for you because your top actions are just doing an attack 5 is way more valuable than you doing a heal 3. There is, I think, only one card that we're going to have through our entire class that would actually use the dark, so you're not really going to get much value out of the dark. Maybe you have an ally that can use it, in which case it can be helpful, but I wouldn't bring this card just so that you have a way to infuse dark for an ally. The bottom action of move 3 and then poison 1 it's better, but it's not worth it for me to take this card with me regularly. You have way better movements than just move 3, so the movement isn't that exciting. The poison at range 1, I mentioned that you only have 2 ways of poisoning enemies consistently. This is the other way you have a level 1 of poisoning enemies consistently. So you can use this to just increase the amount of damage that you and your allies are dealing to a specific enemy. But poisoning one enemy isn't that great. It is on the bottom action of a card, so it is a nice thing to do on top of your movement. But I just found that I did bring this with me a few times when I was level 1. However, as I started to level up, I found that I really wanted to bring other cards way more than this one. That bottom action isn't bad, it's just not as good as other cards. It doesn't carry this card enough for me to want to take it over other cards. Next we have Swift Bow. The top action is attack 3 at range 4. The bottom action is move 3 and then loot each hex you entered with the move ability. This is all at initiative 36. This is our other range attack that we get at level 1. It's slightly higher range, it's only single target, it's slightly higher attack. So it's a solid attack to be able to do at range 4. Even if you're just focusing on melee, this can be a nice attack to have in your back pocket every once in a while, just if you can't get to an enemy or you're just not in a position where you want to move yourself into a bunch of enemies. Or let's say you have an ally that's about to open a door, you stand behind the ally, you get off a ranged attack, and you kind of stay in safety. The bottom action is the amazing loot ability. I love this loot ability. The fact that you're able to just move and pick up coins as you go, it helps make it feel that you're not just using a turn just for looting. You're still able to move. This is a card that is very much worth enhancing with a +1 enhancement as early as you possibly can, because you're probably going to be bringing this card with you for at least a few levels. Even if you're going into the melee build, this is a very easy card to convince yourself to take for both actions. But that bottom action is just so nice for being able to do some movement and loot an extra 2 to 3 hexes while you're on your way. Next, we have Practice Reflexes. Move 3, Attack 3 is our top action. The bottom action is move 3, and then you may choose not to spring traps in the hexes you entered with this movement. The following ability is destroy 1 trap in a hex entered with the move ability to gain 1 experience, and this is at initiative 64. The initiative on this is just not good. It's pretty bad. You can reliably go later than some enemies, but for a lot of enemies, you are just not going to be able to really definitively say that you're going to go later than them. So it's not a great initiative, but you're not going to take this card for the initiative. You're most likely going to be taking this card for the top action. Doing a move 3 and then attack 3, like I mentioned before, movement on the top action of cards, especially when it's paired with an attack as well, is very strong. Especially for the melee build, this is something that you're going to really want to consider because it also pairs exceptionally well with the bottom of Quick Hands, which has that bottom attack. The pairing of these is excellent if you find yourself in a situation where you just cannot get an enemy to meet the targeting requirements of some of your other stronger single target attacks. In this case, instead of doing like an attack 5 like you might see from the top of Flanking Strike, you are instead doing 2 attack 3s, which depending on your modifier deck is, about the same or slightly better than attack 5. In other cases, it could be a couple damage better than an attack 5. The bottom action of Practice Reflexes, on the other hand, it's very situational. You may choose not to spring traps in the hexes you enter with this movement and then destroy 1 trap in a hex you entered. It's It's useful if you need a way to destroy traps that are in the way of some of your allies trying to move and they don't have jump. Like, yeah, it can help to avoid some damage on your enemies. I think the main use for this card, though, is just going to be that top action. If you're trying to destroy traps, you have some abilities that allow you to do forced movement on enemies, and you should be using that forced movement to destroy traps, either because that trap is in your way or because you're just trying to deal extra damage. Just destroying a trap just for the experience is kind of not great. And like we mentioned before with the bottom of Special Mixture, a move 3 for you is not good. You have other movements that are way better. We've only really seen one great movement card so far, but we will get good movement cards coming up as well. So practice Reflexes. Take it for the top action if you're going to take it. I think this is going to end up being a somewhat of a quick cut for the ranged build, but can be an excellently useful card for the melee build. Single Out is our next card. The top action is another attack 3 with a targeting requirement of add +2 attack and gain 1 experience if the target is adjacent to none of its allies. The bottom action is a persistent loss, that says on your next 4 attacks targeting enemies adjacent to none of their allies, add +3 attack. And you get experience for after doing the second attack and the 4th attack for those. And all of this is at Initiative 86. The top attack is another staple card, especially at early levels. Again, for the melee build, this is going to remain a staple action for you for quite a while. But early on, you are going to be doing most of your damage with melee anyway, so for almost all Silent Knives at low levels, this is going to be in your hand. This attack will be easier for you to do if you are in... I lost my train of thought there. If you are in smaller parties, this attack will be easier for you to do because there's going to be fewer monsters, so it's going to be more likely that the monsters are next to none of their allies. If you're in a larger party, the other attack from Flanking Strike is going to be easier for you to do. But in both cases, regardless of your party size, you should have both of these cards in your hand early on. The bottom action of this has the potential for a lot of power output. Like if you were able to maximize the use of this, this is 12 damage over the course of 4 attacks. I mean, that's awesome. You could be doing attack 5s, attack 7, attack 8. Also bear in mind, this does not say melee attack. This just says on your next 4 attacks target enemies adjacent to none of their allies. So it can be ranged attacks. You could pair this with the top of Throwing Knives if you really want to try to maximize the value of the bottom of Single Out and you want to make sure that you're getting as many attacks out. The top of Throwing Knives is a really good way of doing this. This is also just a pattern that we generally like to see on our cards that have a loss action. Is the loss action is very powerful and then the other action on the card is very repeatable. It makes it a card that you want to keep for a while, especially for a 9-card class where you don't want to be using loss actions early in the scenario. You generally want to be using them later. You're going to be doing the top of Single Out for a while until you're ready to say, okay, I'm ready to use the bottom. I will say personally, I haven't always gotten the most out of the bottom of Single Out. I just really like the top action of this card, and by the time that I felt like I was ready in the scenario to start playing the bottom of this as a loss, I wasn't able to get all 4 charges out. I think if you're able to get at least 3 charges of the attacks out, and you're able to get, +3 attack 9 or 3 times to get like a total of 9 damage out of it, then I think this loss is still worth playing. Anything less than that, and I think it's a little bit rough, but I think maybe would have used the bottom of this a little bit too conservatively. I think I could have been a little bit more aggressive with it. So I am curious how other people view this action because, yeah, to me it's just fine. I just didn't maximize the potential a lot of it often enough myself. For the next card, we have a small novel to read in the top action of Sinister Opportunity, which says it's an attack 3 with subtext of add +1 attack if the target is adjacent to any of your allies, and +1 attack if the target is adjacent to none of its allies, and gain advantage and 1 experience if both are true. The bottom action is a move 5, and this is all at Initiative 93. Really quick on the initiative, because I forgot to mention it with Single Out. These are both great cards for initiative because they are strong initiative. They are cards that are definitively going to be early or late, and in this case they are going to be going very late, almost always after all monsters if you're using this as your leading initiative card. These are great cards to be able to balance out the fast initiatives in your hand because they are what allows you to do that initiative weaving. You should have some late initiative cards in your hand. For Sinister Opportunity, we have what is basically a combination of the top attacks from Flanking Strike and Single Out, where we now have the opportunity to get benefit for meeting both of those conditions, where an enemy is adjacent to none of its allies and it's adjacent to one of your allies. Not only are you doing an attack 5, but you're also doing it at advantage. And especially early on for the Silent Knife, when your modifier deck just isn't that good yet, having advantage is a huge advantage. And if you're not able to set up that top action to be able to fulfill both bonuses for it, then that bottom action of a move 5 is just excellent to have. Just like Flanking Strike, it's a move 5 non-loss, and again, having a big movement on a strong initiative card is fantastic. This is another card where almost every Silent Knife, regardless of if you eventually want to go into ranged or if you want to stay melee, at least in your lower levels, this is almost always going to be in your hand. Great card overall. For our first level X card, we have Backstab. The top action is a loss. It's an attack 5, consume dark to add 2 attack to that and gain an experience, and then add +2 attack and gain an experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. So overall, this has the potential to be an attack 9, but it is a loss. The bottom action is a move 6, and this is all at initiative 6. Let's focus on the bottom action of this card first. It's going to spend just a little bit talking about it, but a move 6. Yes, move 6 is better than a move 5. Move 6 is in fact greater than that. But having a non-loss move 6 at level 1 is bananas. So far, we've seen 2 move 5s and a move 6, and this is what I mean when I talk about those move 3s on some of those cards that we had at level 1 not being that impressive. Move 3 is just not that impressive for this class. You can be doing way more movement. And all of this movement is what really allows you, combined with the initiative weaving, it allows you to be able to avoid attacks by just not being near monsters when they attack. To me, this is a very easy card to bring because it is a super low initiative. It's very fast. It is a card that I know I want to be using for the most part for the movement rather than that top action. So it's just a nice card to have in your hand, especially at low levels, to say, yep, I have a great movement card in my hand, and I know it's going to be in there until I need to use a movement. The top loss is, I don't know. You can make it an attack 9. Yes. You have 1 or 2 ways of infusing dark. We've seen one of them. So yes, there's a chance that you're going to have dark available for this that you can use, and you can pair it with the other bonus to make it an attack 9. But it's going to take a lot of setup to make it an attack 9, and for a class that can already be doing attack 5s at non-loss, it's just not that impressive to me. Most of the times when I played this card, it was just towards the end of the scenario when I was trying to get a little bit of experience. It was less so that I really needed a big attack and more so that I was like, I still have this in my hand because I just haven't lost it from resting yet. So why not? Let's just finally use the top of this. But even in those cases, I rarely had the dark to infuse with it. So it was just an attack 7. And then when you're comparing a loss attack 7 versus a non-loss attack 5, it's just not even a comparison. At that point, it is not worth playing that loss action for it. Also, it's just really, really dejecting if you play a loss action like this and you have that attack 9 lined up and then you draw that null card. Ooh, baby, are there a few things that hurt worse than that in Gloomhaven. So anyway, it is a great card. It found its way into my hand most times when I was playing, especially at low levels, mainly for that movement, and occasionally I would use that top loss action at the end of a scenario, but yeah, to each their own. Our second X card is Trickster's Reversal. The top action is a persistent card, forgot the word for a second, and the effect says, on your next melee attack targeting an enemy that has shield, add +X+2, where X is the shield value of the target. So basically you're adding 2 more than the shield value of that target to your next attack targeting a shielded enemy. The bottom action is negate the next damage you would suffer this round, and the initiative is at 9. I will say I think I underused this card. Not at all for the bottom action, because I really don't think the bottom action is good, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the top action, I don't really know that I used at all during my playthrough, and I think there were probably cases where, especially at level 1, I could have benefited from using that. It's amazing because not only are you just adding X that where you're meeting the shield value, you're actually adding additional attack beyond that. Combined with the fact that it's a non-loss card and it's a persistent card, so you can play this in a dead round and then not have to worry about losing it by attacking a non-shielded enemy, it is very good. Like I said though, at level 2, we'll end up looking at a choice where you might have better things that you want to be doing with that quote-unquote dead round, for your top action at least. But depending on what card you take at level 2, and especially at level 1, like I do think there's actually a lot of cases where you could justify having this card in your hand for the top action and being able to delete some shielded enemies. And I think you can kind of just ignore the bottom action on this card. Again, maybe some people get value out of it. I'm not saying it is always a bad thing, being able to negate the next source of damage that you would suffer this round. There's potential that it could be very good, but it's going to be very rare for it to actually hit and save you a lot of damage. If a monster is attacking you, then you are basically at the whim of the attack modifier draw, and if it's an attack that would only deal you 1 or 2 damage normally, well, now you just kind of wasted this effect. You only saved yourself 1 or 2 damage. That's not worth it for the bottom action of a card, in my opinion. There could be a case where it saves you from a crit, but you can't plan for that. That's just, for the most part, unless you're really good at counting cards, in which case, you know, it'd be kind of interesting to play Gloomhaven if you were really good at counting cards. But you're basically playing this bottom action at the expense of playing a movement where that movement could just save you from getting attacked at all. Plus, this card isn't going to save you from subsequent attacks, so if you're positioned near more than one enemy that's attacking, you're still going to take those other attacks. And you can take a couple of attacks. Like I said, your health pool is not tiny. Like, you can take some attacks and be okay, but you don't really want to be using this often in lieu of your movement ability. Our final level X card is Smoke Bomb. The top action is a persistent loss that says, Invisible Self, and then on your next attack, while you have invisibility, double the value of the attack, infuse dark, and after you do that attack, you get 2 experience. The bottom action is a move 4 and then control 1 adjacent enemy, and then target an adjacent enemy to have them move 1. This movement must end in a hex adjacent to the Silent Knife. This is all at initiative 12, and ignore the fact that I feel like I butchered the wording of that bottom action, because the bottom action is phenomenal. It's another one of our tools that we can use to do force movement on enemies to set them up for our attacks that get bonuses from being either adjacent to our allies or adjacent to none of their allies. Plus, it's another thing that we can do to try to get an enemy to walk themselves into a trap. This is an extremely powerful card, and especially for the melee focused Silent Knives, you're going to keep this in your hand most likely for quite a bit of time. That top action, yes, it is just begging to be played prior to playing the top of Backstab. And yes, it can be extremely satisfying to say, I'm going to go invisible, and then on my next attack, I'm essentially going to be doing an attack 18. It's fun to do that just because it's hilarious to be able to put out that much damage. At the same time, it is not worth it for you to do 2 loss actions to be able to do an attack 18. That is taking a huge hit to your endurance. Even if you're doing a boss scenario, yes, that could be a good use case for it, because then just maybe you also crit on this and you end up doing like an attack, 36, which is that's just a hilarious amount of damage to do in one attack. But you are burning 2 losses basically on a single attack. You're getting some defensive capabilities from it, from the invisibility, but you also have to, like, if you choose to do this, you play the top of Smoke Bomb, you better be using the top of Backstab next, because if you don't, well, you're going to have to try to get another source of invisibility and another source of dark, because, yikes, you're not really going to be maximizing that double value. Yeah, there could be some cases where top of Smoke Bomb by itself is just nice for the invisibility and maybe to do a little bit of an extra attack, but it's more funny than it is useful to be able to use the top of Backstab afterwards. If you're just starting off with the Silent Knife and you're looking for a good starting hand to play with, I usually do recommend for most classes, like even for myself, I'll usually just play the first scenario with them as like, let me just take all your level 1 cards and I'll just ignore your level X cards, and then after I get the feel for them, then I'll swap things out. However, in this case, I think some of the level X cards, 2 of them are really great to have in your hand. So I think cutting these 3 cards from your hand and keeping all your other level 1 and level X cards is a pretty good starting hand to give you some abilities with both melee and ranged. Then if you know you're going to be dealing with a number of shielded enemies in this scenario, maybe substitute in Venom, Shiv, and or Trickster's Reversal. If you think you're going to be doing more melee attacks, bring in Trickster's Reversal. If you think you're going to be doing more ranged attacks, bring Venom, Shiv. At level 2, our first choice is Open Wound. The top action is Attack 4 with subtext of add wound and gain 1 experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies. The bottom action is a move 6, and this is at initiative 11. The top action of this is just a slight upgrade to the top of Flanking Strike, although if you're really focusing on melee attacks, you can absolutely have both these cards in your hand. I think it's still a good idea. But being able to do Wound is another tool that we can have for dealing with shielded enemies. Also, just this card is going to deal just as much damage as the top of Flanking Strike, assuming you draw like a +0 modifier. It's still going to do 5 damage by the time the first enemy's turn comes up after suffering this wound. They're still going to take 5 damage. But the benefit of this card, obviously, is that that wound is going to continue to tick down their health unless they get healed. So, very solid attack, and being able to have a tool for dealing wound is lovely. Then the bottom of it is a move 6 at initiative 11. This maybe could, if you're going to continue keeping Flanking Strike in your hand, maybe this replaces something like Backstab, because the initiative is pretty similar. You're still getting that move 6, but now you're also getting a top action that you're going to be using repeatedly as well. This is a card that is clearly focused on take this if you really want to continue focusing on the melee-focused damage. And on the other side, we have Stick to the Shadows. The top action is a persistent card, and on your next 3 attacks, you add +1 attack and poison. After doing that second attack is when you get 1 experience. The bottom action is move 3. Then, if you are adjacent to no enemies, gain invisibility. At the end of the round, lose invisibility, and this is at initiative 26. This is the action that I was talking about where this was something that I wanted to be doing during my dead rounds as my top action. If my teammates were resting, if I had already rested, then we were just preparing to go into the next room. There were very frequently times where I was just wanting to do the top of this to be able to increase the power of my next few attacks and add poison. That poison allowing us to deal more damage overall as a party. This is a great ability both for melee and ranged Silent Knives. It's a little bit easier to get the full value out of it as a ranged Silent Knife because you're going to be dealing more multi-targeted attacks. Therefore, it is more likely to use up all charges of this between your rest cycles because as your hand starts to get smaller and smaller, you're going to be dealing fewer attacks each round. So for the melee, you can still get plenty of value out of this, though it's slightly geared towards the ranged Silent Knife build. That also combined with the fact that +1 attack to an attack 2 is more impactful than a +1 attack to an attack 5. It's just a higher percentage increase. The bottom action is something that you're probably going to want to pair with a faster initiative because you are gaining invisibility. It is a consistent way to go invisible. However, it's a little bit nerfed in the fact that you're only going invisible for the current round. So you want to pair this with a fast initiative so that way you know that you're beating all the monsters. Because if you don't beat the monsters this round, then the invisibility isn't really doing much for you anyway. This ability can be a little bit awkward to use as the melee because you are trying to generally get into melee range with the enemies, so you're going to be adjacent to enemies more frequently than the ranged. However, I'll talk about this in a second, but this is the card that I took with my Silent Knife. And I didn't find it that awkward. There were still a lot of points where I found it very valuable to have that way to go invisible if I couldn't get to a safe place and I just needed something to be able to just make me invisible. Maybe it was something where I was like, I feel confident that I can kill this enemy that I'm going to move up to. And then, well, actually, never mind. No, that wouldn't make any sense. So just ignore the fact that I said that. I'm not even going to cut it. I'm just going to leave my mistakes in here so you can know that I am human. So which card to pick? Like I mentioned at the early part of the video, and I'll say it again here, I'll probably say it again in the later parts of this video, we're going to see a consistent theme where during our level ups, you're going to have, for the most part, a choice between a card that leans towards melee damage and a card that leans towards range damage. If you really want to lean into the range damage, then I would absolutely take Stick to the Shadows. I think it's going to be extremely useful for you on both halves. If you want to lean into the melee build, I could see an argument for either. I think Open Wound is going to be more clearly the choice for just melee focused damage, and having that source of wound is going to be, like I said, a great tool for you to have in your tool belt. This is a point, and we're going to talk about a card soon that actually made me want to do this, but this is a point where I decided that I was going to do a little bit of range damage while mainly focusing on melee damage. So I took Stick to the Shadows personally, because I just thought it paired well with a number of cards that I had. And for instance, I really like how it paired with the top of Throwing Knives. But there are absolutely times where I felt it would be nice to have a source of wound as well. Our first choice at level 3 is Hidden Daggers. The top action is a loss. We're going to get 2 experience from playing it. And it is 5 sequential attack 2 at range 3s. The bottom action is an attack 1, target 2 at range 3. And the subtext is add +1 attack on each target that is adjacent to none of its allies. And this is at initiative 39. The initiative is pretty bad on this card, but the actions on it are great. The bottom action is the first time that we're getting some attacks at range for our range build. So this is immediately should be triggering some flashing lights for folks who want to lean into the ranged Silent Knife. That bottom action does require you to do a little bit of planning. So just like all of our bottom attacks that have no movement associated with them, you have to do some planning on how you're going to set yourself up to be able to do this, because the range 3 is totally fine for a top action where you can use a bottom action to do some movement. But if you're using a bottom action where you're doing attacks at range 3, you have to make sure that you are planning accordingly. You know there's going to be enemies within range. And for that reason, it could make sense to actually add a +1 enhancement to that range to make it a little bit easier to use. I normally do like to add the +1 to the target for a card like this. You're going to have plenty of money as a Silent Knife, so you could maybe do both, although you'll probably have other enhancements that you want to do as well. But +1 range, +1 attack, or +1 target, both good enhancements for this card. And you don't have to focus on needing to do that bottom text to be able to make this card useful. It makes it significantly more useful. You're doubling the damage if you can do 2 attack 2s as a bottom action. That's just great action economy for a bottom. But even without it, 2 attack 1s is totally fine, especially as your attack modifier deck gets better. Like, those can just inherently become attack 1 or attack 2, attack 3. And you're going to be drawing more modifiers. So we're going to talk about this as we get into the perk selections, but this is where we now really start to see the ranged builds start to be drawing a ton of modifiers, because you're doing it potentially on both the bottom and top actions of your cards. This is going to make it easier for you to hit your some of those rolling modifiers like the invisibility. This could potentially help you to hit some of those disarm modifiers. So something to keep in mind as you're looking at your level up selection is those perk choices, and how something like the ranged build, which does a lot of attack modifier draws, can help you to get some of those modifiers that may be a little bit less consistent than with the melee build. That top action is an amazing loss. It is just begging to be played with something like a power potion. But the beauty of this is that you could choose to attack 5 different enemies. You could choose to attack a single enemy with all of them. You could spread those attacks around, like maybe you play the top of Stick to the Shadows before you play this card, so those first 3 attacks are attack 3 with poison, and then the final 2 attacks, maybe you circle back and attack 2 of those enemies that you had previously poisoned, and so that way you end up making this essentially an attack 15, which is just, that's a lot of damage. Like, your lost cards at level as a 9-card hand should be pretty high damage, but 15 attack is wild before modifiers. The last thing I'll note is that the bottom action also does just pair very well with the top of Stick to the Shadows anyway, because it allows you to start just immediately getting value out of some of those charges that you're using from Stick to the Shadows. Our second choice at level 3 is Flintlock. The top action is an attack 3 at range 2 with Muddle. The subtext is you may place one of your money tokens in the hex occupied by the target to add +2 attack and pierce 2, and you infuse fire with this. The bottom action is a move to loot 1 and then create 1 poison and immobilize trap in the empty hex of 1 looted money token, and this is all at initiative 51. This level is by far the worst level in terms of the initiative cards you're going to have. Like usually at most levels you have at least one really good initiative, whether it's really fast or really slow. Both these initiatives are pretty bad between these cards. But that's fine. We're going to have plenty of amazing initiative cards, so it doesn't really bother us that much. This is an odd card to me in the sense that the other card is clearly something that is geared towards if you're trying to do ranged attacks. So this should be something that is more focused on melee attacks. It is focused on single target, so it's not necessarily melee, but it is single target. I just find that like this was kind of the level choice as I was looking forward to my level ups, as I was somewhat planning out my build a little bit. Looking at this card, at these cards at level 3 was like, I really wanted to take Hidden Daggers just because both those actions are such fun things. And even though I wanted to lean into the melee build, this just felt kind of awkward to play with the melee. I will say take that with a grain of salt because I have not actually played this card with the melee. I kind of wish the top action, instead of being range 2, I do wish it was attack an enemy within 2 hexes, so that way you could do it. You get the versatility of being able to attack something that's not melee without the penalty of being adjacent to your target anyway. However, the benefit of it being ranged is that you can still pair it with the bottom of Venom Shiv, so you can stack that piercing. So now you could potentially make this an attack 5, pierce 4. And I will say that also you need to be playing this action with that money token. This is not worth it as just an attack 3, range 2 muddle. I mean, it's fine, but you should be using your money token to really get the full value out of this card. But let's talk about the bottom action. That move 2 and then loot 1, create 1 poison, immobilize trap. I'm not really that impressed with it. I think for the most part, you're going to get more value out of the loot action from something like the bottom of, bottom of Swift Bow, where you don't need to, it's going to be more movement, and if you enhance it, you're going to get a move 4 out of it. And you just get a little bit more versatility with it. You're potentially getting more loot with the bottom of Flintlock, depending on how the loot is laid out. Oh, sorry, that's also very hard to see. Depending on how the loot is laid out, you're benefiting more from the bottom of Flintlock. And that trap ability just doesn't really do anything for me, because generally you're going to be wanting to wait until later in a room anyway to be playing this bottom action. Just because if you're doing a loot, that's typically what you want to be doing, because there's going to be more loot on the ground the more enemies that you kill. But if you're doing this late enough, then just creating a poison and immobilize trap is not really that special. It's not really going to turn the tides for you in any way. Maybe you can use it to manipulate enemy pathing if you're planning on opening another room and then have enemies funnel in towards you. But it's an extremely situational card. It's not great movement. Plus, we already have other things that can help us loot. So if you're going to take Flintlock, take it for the top action for the most part. At least that's my recommendation. Because an attack 5 at range 2 is very strong. And even though I'm kind of poo-pooing the ranged aspect of it a bit, because I see this as more of like the card that you want to take if you're focusing on single target, mostly melee damage, I find that range a little weird. But at the same time, I talk about having tools in your tool belt. Having a small ranged attack in your tool belt is also good. And your modifier deck can get so good that drawing an attack at disadvantage isn't going to be the end of the world. But it does, neuter this attack a little bit. As to which card to take, if you are leaning into the ranged attacks, it is very clearly obvious that you should be taking Hidden Daggers here, because it's just awesome. You're going to be playing a lot of that bottom action. Then when you're ready to play the top action, you're going to love losing it for that loss, because it's going to deal a ton of damage, and it's flexible in terms of dealing it to multiple enemies or dealing it to a single enemy. If you're leaning into the single target kind of melee build, then Flintlock is a good pick. I wouldn't blame you if you house rule this card so that it is a within 2 hexes instead of a range 2. It does kind of ruin the theme a little bit. But the full disclosure of it is that there were times where when I was playing the Silent Knife, before I really committed to what I was doing, I was a little unsure if I should have gone back in respect and taken Flintlock just so I could get more single target damage. Because there were some times where I wanted to be moving and I just wasn't getting the value out of the bottom of Hidden Daggers because I didn't fully commit to the range build. So I don't know, take all that information how you will and help it affect your choice. But I need to progress past my indecision into level 4, because there are some fun cards at level 4. The first card we're going to look at, Flurry of Blades, is an attack 2, target 3, range 3, gain an experience as a top action. Bottom action is a move 7, and the initiative is 16. Not a whole lot to say about this card other than it's excellent. It is an upgrade to the top of throwing knives. If you're going into the ranged build, you probably have both Flurry of Blades and throwing knives in your hand. But it is throwing knives with an extra target. At this point, you might have enough money to even throw an enhancement on the top of throwing knives as well. So you have 2 cards with this ability of attack 2, target 3 at range 3. Then the bottom of this being a move 7 is just, I mean, this is just silly with how much movement that you can get with this class. It's a great initiative. I mean, 16 is kind of high, quote unquote, for some of your low initiative cards. But like I said, other classes would kill for an initiative 16 card. You can beat a majority of monsters with an initiative 16. It's still fast enough to be pretty reliably faster than most monsters. Not all, depending on the ability cards, not all, but still fairly reliable. The other card is Gruesome Advantage. Top action is attack 4. Add +2 attack and gain 1 experience if the target is adjacent to any of your allies or is adjacent to none of its allies. The bottom action is move 3, and then when you next perform a melee attack targeting an enemy that has poison this round, after the attack ability, perform attack 2 at range 3 poison. This is at initiative 90. Not only is this top action just slightly stronger than some of our level 1 actions of flanking strike or single out, because you have the potential to deal 6 damage instead of 5, it's also extremely nice for the flexibility in that you don't have to decide ahead of time if you're attacking an enemy that is by itself or adjacent to one of your allies. That flexibility pairs extremely well with the late initiative of 90, because 90 is going to be good for our initiative weaving, but also if you're going late in the round, you're going to be less certain of where those monsters are going to be. So having that flexibility of just needing to meet one of those requirements, and you can decide within the round which one you're going to meet, is extremely powerful. The bottom action is something I actually expected to get a little bit more value out of. I took Gruesome Advantage at level 4, and combined with the fact that I had taken Stick to the Shadows at level 2, I thought I was going to have poison on enough enemies that I would be getting some value out of the bottom of this card. I probably could have done some things to set myself up for it. However, I think for the most part, I also just found the top of this to be so useful that, like, even though it is nice to be able to have something that helps you set up for more attacks this round with the bottom action of a card, the bottom of Gruesome Advantage was still had enough requirements on it that it was kind of hard to do, and the top of it was so easy to do that I just preferred to use the top of it. So your mileage may vary, but if you're a melee focused silent knife, you're probably going to be taking Gruesome Advantage at level 4, and we'll talk about that in a second, and you're mostly going to be taking it for that top attack, I assume. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think it's a missed opportunity that this card does not have the bonus on it, where if you meet both those requirements, you get advantage. Because it's called Gruesome Advantage, it has advantage in the title of the card, but there's no way to get advantage on it. It hurts me a little bit. As for which card to take, I will continue with the theme that if you want to lean into the ranged attacks, you're going to take option A of Flurry of Blades. If you're going to lean more into the melee attacks, you should take option B of Gruesome Advantage. This is a little bit more of a clear-cut choice, mainly because it's very obvious which card is going to benefit the melee build if they want to go that route. I will again emphasize, though, the initiative on Gruesome Advantage, because especially for the melee build, you are going to need to be doing initiative weaving a little bit more consistently than the ranged build. And we've had a lot of low initiative values up to this point that, like, that initiative that should be part of the reason that you want to take this card, is that it helps you to really do that initiative weaving. So do not undervalue the value of that initiative 90. Level 5, our first card is Duelist Advance. Top action is move 3, attack 4, move 2. The bottom action is a move 4 and then pull 1 at range 2, and this is at initiative 7. Another fun toy for the melee focused silent knife, because being able to do move and then attack on a top action card, already rare enough in itself, being able to move after that attack is really good. If you are like me and do a mix of melee and range, this top action is fantastic for doing something with the bottom of Hidden Daggers, where you can move into melee, get an attack off, then move away, and then still get the full value out of being able to do that ranged attack and potentially just targeting the attack that you just did, or the target that you just did a melee attack against. It's very good for that kind of combination. It's also very good for still moving adjacent to a melee enemy that is not moving this round, attacking them and then moving away before they can actually attack you. It may not seem that exciting by just looking at it, but I think if you play this action a couple of times, you can really start to see the power that this has of having multiple movements on that. I talk about flexibility. This gives you a lot of flexibility in positioning, and positioning is just so good for so many reasons, especially things like mitigating damage. That bottom action of move 4, pull 1 at range 2 is kind of similar to our pull that we had on the bottom of, oh my gosh, what was it? Smoke Bomb, I think it was. Sorry, not Smoke Bomb, Throwing Knives. The pull itself is worse. Like pull 1, range 2, to me is a very significant downgrade over a pull 2 at range 3. Mainly for the fact that, obviously less forced movement, less likelihood that you're going to be able to pull an enemy into a trap. The movement on the top, or before that action, the move 4, makes up for some of it because you can actually get yourself into a better position so that you can pull that enemy where you need them to be. So it does balance this card out a little bit, or balance out that action. But admittedly, it's a little disappointing that the pull itself is worse than the level 1 card. You can enhance this to be a pull 2 at range 3, but I think I did the math before, and it was something like, even if you're using temporary enhancements, because it's a level 5 card, having multiple things on that is going to cost you like 250 gold or more. And at that point, I think there's just better enhancements that you're going to want to do, because, yeah, that's a lot of investment to make in a single pull. But overall, it's a fantastic card. We really like both actions on it. You're going to get a lot of value out of both of them. It makes it really nice to have in a 9-card hand, because especially as we're starting to level up, we're starting to remove cards from our hand that we really like playing and were originally like kind of maybe not core cards, but cards that we played and we loved playing. So having a card like this that can come in and have 2 repeatable actions that are going to be consistently valuable and give you ways to just do the things that you need to do is a really welcome tool. How many times can I use the word tool in one sentence or one video? I don't know. It's going to be a lot. Keep counting. Our other choice here is Serrated Arrow. The top action is an attack 4 at range 3 with wound. The bottom action is a persistent loss that says on your next attack, targeting an enemy that is both adjacent to any of your allies and none of its allies, double the value of the attack. After you do that attack, you get 2 experience, and this is at initiative 95. Once again, it can be nice to have a late initiative card, especially for the ranged Silent Knife who has taken a lot of early initiative upgrades at this point. This will be a nice tool to add. There we go again. Use the word tool again. This will be nice to add to your card hand just to be able to have more cards that you can do initiative weaving with. This is kind of like Swift Bow, although the range and the attack are inverted because it's a more powerful attack with a shorter range, but you're okay with that range most likely because you're typically doing your attacks at range 3 anyway, so that downgrade I don't think should be too much of a big deal for you. And now you are getting a tool into your toolkit. I'm just going to laugh every time I say it now. But being able to deal wound, this is nice for being able to hit enemies that are on the back line, like those shielded enemies that we talked about before, that like to be doing ranged attacks. You can hit one of them, and then within a couple of turns, it should die from the wound, and you'll have dealt a couple of damage maybe from that high-powered attack. The bottom action, to me, I don't know if you'd ever really play it unless you're just playing it to try to get some experience at the end of a scenario. It's just weird to play with the ranged Silent Knife. I don't think you're going to take this card if you are the melee focused Silent Knife. The melee focused Silent Knife is the one that generally has higher damage attacks as single target. The bottom of Serrated Arrow is kind of begging to be played with the top of Serrated Arrow if you were going to play it, but obviously we can't do that. So you could do something like you play this and then you already have Stick to the Shadows out, so you're getting maybe like +1 attack to Swift Bow, and then you're doubling the whole thing to an attack 8. I mean, that's a nice single target tool for the ranged Silent Knight to have, but it's a loss, and you're still going to have to then meet the requirements of that enemy has to be both adjacent to one of your allies and none of its own allies. that's just too situational for this, for not a lot of payoff. Like, the top is a nice repeatable action, but the bottom, I just don't think you're ever really going to use it. I think a fun way to change this, if you're interested in experimenting, would be to make it on your next range attack targeting an enemy that meets both those conditions, then double the value of the attack. Then you change this to a non-loss action. I think it makes it so that the melee build can't try to take this and abuse that non-loss doubling the value of an attack, but you might actually try to get some value out of it with the ranged build. Even in that case, it might still be too situational that you don't really care about it, but could be something worth trying. I swear that some of the other class guide videos are going to be more interesting to talk about, some of the level up choices here, but once again, if you're interested in taking the melee focused builds, melee focused attacks, you're going to take Duelist Advance. Then if you're interested in the ranged attacks, you're going to take Serrated Arrow. If you're the ranged build and you're just not that interested in the attack 4, you could consider going back and actually taking Flintlock. It's only a range 2, but it could be an attack 5. So that just depends on your playstyle and how things have been going, but I do like the wound from Serrated Arrow. At level 6, our first choice here is Dance of Daggers. The top action is a loss for the round that says, negate the damage and added effects of all attacks targeting you this round. Then immediately after each attack ability targeting you this round, gain 1 experience and perform attack 2 targeting the enemy that attacked 2. Ooh, that's a lot. The bottom action is move 4 and then gain advantage on all your attacks this round, and this is at initiative 3. Once again, we're seeing a pattern of a really powerful loss card with a very repeatable other action on it. And this is at initiative 3. I think this is going to be the second best initiative that we're going to see on this entire class. And being able to do a move 4, gain advantage on all your attacks this round, that is going to be significantly more beneficial for the ranged Silent Knife, who is generally going to be doing multi-targeted attacks. For the melee Silent Knife, you can get some value out of this, but you're really only going to be getting advantage on 1 attack, although potentially you may want to take this card if you're the ranged melee Silent Knife for a later choice. I think it's at level 9. But for the most part, the melee would only be getting advantage on 1 attack, which, while nice, may not be enough to want to take this card. But that loss action is just so, just hilariously, like, I mean, it could be bad in the sense that, like, if you move into a room with this, like, you could, and you're a party of 4 or something like that, you could be getting a ton of experience with this. You could be mitigating a ton of damage and dealing damage. Like, that's what makes this loss so incredibly powerful, is that you are mitigating damage and dealing damage. That is a huge sway in the tides of battle. You're also going to be doing a lot of attacks that are going to be drawing modifiers from your attack modifier deck. You have a great attack modifier deck that's dealing even more damage. The one note that I'll add on this is that if you draw your rolling invisibility while you are using this action, you probably want to not gain that invisibility, because it's just going to neuter the rest of this attack. It depends on how early in the monster is going that you draw that invisibility. If you draw it like on the last monster attack, obviously then could be worth taking, because then you're at least invisible for the next round as well. But just note that there's some caveats to how you might want to handle some of those things. Our second option is Cull the Weak. The top action is an attack 5, add +1 attack and gain advantage and an experience if the target is a normal monster. The bottom action is attack 2, target 2 enemies whose hit point value is 2 or less at range 2, and then do a loot 2, and this is all at initiative 62. Terrible initiative, but we'll just ignore that. The top action is just so lovely for our melee focused Silent Knife, because you are now continuing to add types of requirements that can give you bonuses to attack. So we initially started off with, it's just looking at if an enemy is adjacent to one of your allies or none of their allies. Then we had Flintlock, which gave us the ability to increase the attack if we put a money token in that space. Now we have another one that says, just attack a normal monster, and you're going to get an attack 6 at advantage. It is very nice to have ones that do not require you to have to focus on positioning. It's less to think about. It's just easy to be like, I'm just going to attack that one normal monster, depending on its health. Good chance I'm going to kill it. This could easily be an attack 7 or an attack 8. So just a solid, consistent top action. That bottom action, it can be very good. That attack 2, target 2 enemies could be enough to just be able to clean up a couple of enemies that you have that are in the room with you. It's a fair bit restrictive in terms of they have to be at range 2, so it is also still a ranged attack, which means if they're adjacent to you, you're going to get a disadvantage on that. And they have to be have 2 health or less, which is kind of annoying. You'll probably have a few scenarios where it's like, oh, this is the perfect card to have, but maybe a little bit situational. What's less situational, though, is a non-lost loot 2. Holy shit. I don't think any other class has a non-lost loot 2. I may be wrong about that because I have a terrible memory. If you've watched any of my playthrough videos, you know that. But you already have tons of ways of getting loot tokens. This non-lost loot 2 is just going to have, the other people in your group are just going to have so much extra free time on their hands as you are spending all the time between scenarios deciding which items you're going to buy, which enhancements you're going to buy, and your broke friends are just, they can go get some snacks and stuff. And when they ask if they can have some of that gold, that's when you just say, like, I would love to give you some of this gold, but like, it's just against the rules. I don't make the rules. I'm so sorry. Now shut up while I think about my enhancements. Now, for which card should you take? The ranged focus is going to take Dance of Daggers because that advantage on the bottom of that card is just going to be too nice to pass up. You're going to get a lot of value out of that, and you're just going to laugh yourself. I almost said to sleep. You're probably not, maybe not to sleep, to death. That sounds terrible. You're going to laugh a lot when you play that top loss action and you just get a lot of experience out of it, a lot of damage out of it. It's just, I took this card because of that, because I only had one scenario to use it, and I was like, this is going to be just so funny to play this top action. So I think it's a great card, especially so for the ranged build. Cull of the Week is a great choice for the melee build. You are going to get another single target high value attack. You're going to get flexibility in terms of your bonuses, like the requirements for bonuses. That non-lost loot 2 is going to allow you to just vacuum up all the money tokens. However, if you are playing the Silent Knife pretty late in a campaign, you think you're going to be hitting level 9, then there is consideration that the melee-focused Silent Knife should take Dance of Daggers, but we'll see that at level 9 as well. But Cull of the Week is a safer choice for the melee. At level 7, we have Spring the Trap as our first option. The top action says, this action may be performed while you have stun, then remove all negative conditions you have, and then heal 5 stealth. The bottom action says, designate 1 adjacent trap, then move 5 jump, and then relocate the designated trap to an adjacent featureless hex. If that hex is occupied by an enemy, spring the trap on that enemy and gain 1 experience. Let me talk about the bottom action first. Oh, I'm sorry, this is all in Initiative 13. I'm jumping ahead. Let me talk about the bottom action first. The bottom action can be really strong. Being able to just take a trap and just spring it on an enemy that you move next to, that can deal a lot of damage. It's damage that scales with the scenario level, so it's going to just keep increasing in effectiveness. It's direct damage, so it bypasses shield, and it's damage that you can deal to a flying enemy who normally doesn't have to worry about traps, and there are some shielded enemies that have or some flying enemies that have a ton of shield. And yes, I'm looking at you, you damn flame demons. Flam demons. Flan demons. Demons made of flan. That being said, it is a little situational in that the scenario does have to have traps in it. Most scenarios do have at least a couple of traps in it, so, you'll be able to use this action quite a bit. But there also has to be traps in the room, so there may at least be rooms where you're just not going to get much value out of this bottom action. And you're rarely going to get any value out of that top action, at least in my opinion. Like a lot of the things that I said about special mixture apply to what I'm saying here. Because you should infrequently be getting attacked. That heal 5 self shouldn't really be doing a whole lot for you. If you're not getting attacked very often, you're not going to have stun very often, so you're not really going to benefit from being able to do this while you're stunned. You shouldn't often have negative conditions on you, and even if you have something like an Immobilize, that could be really annoying for you to have to deal with. Like, Immobilize can be very frustrating for the Silent Knife to have to deal with, and this can be a way to deal with being immobilized. But you have way better things that you want to be doing as your top actions. At this point, you're doing like attack 5, attack 6, attack 7 with your top actions. For you to just do a heal 5 and removing some negative conditions, like the amount of times that that's going to be worth sacrificing an attack for, I just don't think it's going to be worth it. To me, this is very below the bar for a level 7 top action, especially on a 9 card class. The other level 7 card is a beauty. Top action, or this is Stiletto Storm. The top action is attack 2, target 2 at range 3. And then if all the targets of the attack ability were adjacent to none of their allies, perform attack 2, target 2, range 3, and you get an experience for doing this. The bottom action is a move 3, attack 3, and this is all at initiative 80. It's a relatively strong initiative. That top action is just, whoa, it's just awesome for the range silent knives. You have the potential to be doing throwing knives twice on one action, which if we're not even thinking about poison or all those other things or modifiers, that's still an attack 8 spread across, 2 to 4 enemies. That's outstanding. And if you had taken the Dance of Daggers at the card before this, level before this, you can get advantage on all these. I think it is valid for that first attack action to be able to do, or the first attack ability to say, like, if there's only one enemy that you can target that is adjacent to none of their allies, you can just target that one, so that way you can unlock the second ability, and there you end up just doing 3 attacks. So I think that's still valid to do that, so you could just make this an attack 6. So in general, I would be trying to hit at least 3 targets with this. And that bottom action is something that the melee silent knives are going to love. You now have a bottom attack ability that also has a movement with it. That can boost your damage for the round, that boosts your movability. There's not a lot bad to say about it. It's great. This card just has something for everybody. So now let's break the pattern on what card I recommend here. I will say that I recommend Stiletto Storm for pretty much every silent knife. Spring the Trap, just that top action just makes me a little sad. The bottom action, again, can be very strong situationally. Like there's a lot of potential for a lot of damage that bypasses shield, that can be dealt to flying enemies, and it's being done on a bottom action. So when you're dealing that much damage that scales with level on a bottom action, I can see if you really want to take this card, I can see why you would want to take it for that action. But it's competing with Stiletto Storm. Stiletto Storm is going to be just hands down the choice for the range silent knife. And being able to have that move 3 attack for the melee silent knife is going to provide you enough consistent value that I think it's just going to win out over Spring the Trap, even if you can get higher ceilings with the bottom ability of Spring the Trap. The amount that I just don't really like the top action of Spring the Trap makes it really hard for me to recommend taking that, and I would just recommend Stiletto Storm for all silent knives. At level 8, we have Crippling Poison. The top action is a persistent loss action that gives you 2 experience. Add poison to all your attacks, and then also add +1 attack to all your attacks targeting enemies that have poison. The bottom action is a move 3, and then add immobilize to all your attacks targeting enemies adjacent to none of their allies this round, and this is at initiative 4. Our first choice at level 7 was not very exciting. Our first choice at level 8 is the opposite. It is extremely exciting. I had said earlier in this video that you don't want to play lost actions early for this class because of the amount that it's going to hurt your endurance, meaning the number of rounds that you can play for this scenario. This is the card where I would argue against that. I can easily see you justifying that the top of Crippling Poison is going to give you enough value that it is worth playing as soon as possible. I'll say more so for the range silent knife, but maybe you could make the argument for the melee silent knife as well. And please critique my math if I'm missing something here, but here's how I would look at it. As a 9-card class, you are typically going to have 20 rounds where you can be playing cards. So excluding long rests, excluding things like stamina potions that can help you to get some cards back, we'll use 20 rounds as our base number. By playing a loss early, we're going to effectively lose 4 of those rounds. So we're going down to 16. That's a 20% reduction in the maximum number of rounds that we're going to be playing for this scenario. So that gives us a baseline of saying, well, let's try to aim to get 20% more damage out of this card so that we can make up for the value that we'd be losing later on. We're basically just going to take some of that damage we'd be doing later and accelerating it earlier into the scenario. And I think this card can easily do that because you are going to be dealing poison to a ton of enemies. Again, I'm going to focus thinking about this card from the perspective of the ranged Silent Knife who's doing a lot of multi-targeted abilities. You're going to be spreading poison around to everybody. And then after you're attacking some of those enemies that already have poison, you're just doing 2 extra damage. Plus, your allies are also going to be doing extra damage from all the poison on there. Not only do I think the damage that is being done from the poison in this card, like not only do I think that is going to effectively make up for the 20% of rounds that you would be losing at the end of the scenario, you're killing enemies faster, so you are mitigating damage that your allies would be taking. So even if you exhaust earlier in the scenario, like if you exhaust before that last room because you have just given it all you've got, you played Crippling Poison early and you start blowing through cards, your allies are going to be in much better shape going into that last round, that last room, whether they have just more cards in hand than they normally would. They're probably going to have more health or fewer negative effects on them. They're just going to be in better shape because you just cranked through that, those first few rooms. You're probably still going to have enough endurance left that you can help out a bit with that last room. But yeah, maybe you exhaust early, but it's probably going to have been worth it for the value of this top action. If you don't want to play this top action immediately, that bottom action is also still extremely powerful, again, especially for the ranged Silent Knife, because being able to add Immobilize to ranged attacks and being able to isolate or immobilize enemies that prevent melee enemies from being able to move into range of your allies, again, you're going to be just mitigating damage with some of that. This is just an incredibly exciting level 8 card. I love cards like this that you just feel excited to play both actions of them. And I also love persistent cards that just kind of change your play style and just become cards that it's like, oh, this is going to be like a core card for me. Speaking of core cards, we can get to Visage of the Inevitable, which is the other level 8 card that we have. The top action is attack 4, add disarm and gain invisibility and 1 experience if the target is both adjacent to any of your allies and none of its allies. And then the bottom action is a move 3, poison all within range 1, and this is initiative 88. I say core card because for the melee-focused Silent Knife, being able to have something that is going to disarm an enemy and consistently give you invisibility is something we love to have. You're going to want to pair this with an early initiative card because, again, when you're trying to go invisible, you're generally going to benefit from doing that early so that you can get 2 rounds or 2 monster rounds, effectively, of being invisible. Plus, because you're disarming that monster, it's easier to convince an ally to get into range of that enemy so that you can say, like, look, I need you to be adjacent to this monster. You're not going to get hit. It's going to be disarmed. You know, Spellweaver, get your ass over here and help me out. The attack value is, it's a little bit low compared to some of our other cards, especially it's a little unfortunate that it's low compared to like a level 1 card where we're doing consistently like at least attack 5s. But the benefits of it from the disarm and the invisibility absolutely make this card worth playing and becoming a key part of your rotation and really trying to set up those effects. The bottom action, move 3, poison all within range 1. Yes, this is absolutely an upgrade to something like the bottom of Special Mixture where you could only poison 1 enemy. Here you're potentially poisoning like, 2 to 4 enemies? This does pair well in a sense with the late initiative because you can try to poison those enemies, do an attack early on the next round, and then get the heck out of there. However, the weird part about it with the late initiative is that it's going to be harder to predict where those enemies are going to be and determine if move 3 is going to be enough to be able to get adjacent to like at least 3 enemies. You're probably going to be rarely playing this for the bottom action. That top action is just going to be something that is just too enticing for you to be able to use. So at level 8, we're going to go back to the pattern of, I'm going to have a recommendation for the ranged Silent Knives, which is to take Crippling Poison. For the melee Silent Knives, you're probably going to want to take Visage of the Inevitable. I keep wanting to call it the Invisible because it has invisibility on it. Although, if you were really excited about Crippling Poison, like I could see melee Silent Knives maybe making the argument for taking it potentially for that top action. It's just not going to be as valuable to you as it is for the ranged Silent Knife. And I really think the consistent invisibility you can get from the top of Visage is really going to be worth it to take it. I wish it was a tool that we were getting a little bit of an earlier level, but we're going to love to have it at this point. At level 9, we get a card that couldn't possibly have more text on it in Hired Help. The top action says, you may lose one of your money tokens to place a character token on an adjacent normal enemy. For the remainder of the scenario, that enemy is an ally to you and an enemy to all other monsters. You may replace its base with a blue base to more easily identify it. When the enemy dies, it drops an additional money token. This will give you 2 experience. Like I said, it's a persistent loss action. Or maybe I didn't say that, I don't remember. The bottom action is a move 4, disarm 1, and this is at our class fastest initiative 2. I am just such a sucker for crazy loss actions. Being able to just take an enemy and just say, you're on my team now, it's just such a fun thing to do. I think it makes it really fun to think about, like, oh, what monsters would it be most beneficial for us to like convert to our side? In terms of its effectiveness, I kind of think of it in a similar way to the top of Dance of Daggers, in that it really has a lot of capability for us both offensively and defensively, because we are taking damage that we would normally have to deal out from our attacks and now changing it to damage that the monsters, the enemies, have to deal to us in order to try to exhaust us. On top of that, we're also going to be getting some attacks out of it from the attacks that that monster would be doing. So we're mitigating more damage that way and just reversing it and applying it to the monsters. You're not going to be able to play this loss immediately, at least, just because you do still have to try to get a money token before you can actually use it. But it's a fun thing to be able to do. Like being able to have a flame demon on your side and they're dealing retaliate and ranged attacks that are AoEs, or just having a huge cave bear with you that is just a massive amount of health. Similarly, a chaos demon that has a lot of health and can be doing a lot of damage and just crazy initiatives and infusing elements. I'm not going to try to speak to like how effective this card always is, because I think the value of it is going to be a little swingy, but it's just such a fun thing to be able to do. Like, I really like the unique mechanic of it. It is similar to something that one of the characters in Frosthaven could do at, I think, also level 9. But fun action. And if you're not going to play this in the first few rest cycles, that bottom action, move 4, disarm 1, that is something that is also a lot of fun to be doing. You can, especially if you are the melee focused Silent Knife, being able to move up to enemies, disarm them, and just continue to unload attacks on them. You know, you don't even have to move away anymore at this point. You can just start unleashing attacks. Granted, you might want to move away from other enemies because you're not disarming everybody, but disarm is such a powerful negative condition to apply, and now you can do it without having to lose a card, and you can do it consistently after a big move. Our other option is Watch It Burn. The top action is a attack to target all adjacent enemies and apply wound and immobilize. Then, if you attacked at least 3 enemies with the attack ability, gain 1 experience and perform move 3, jump, and infuse fire. The bottom action is during your turn, you may play this card from your hand to perform this action in addition to the 2 cards you played for the round and do an attack 5, and this is at initiative 98. This is the card where I was saying that depending on how late you're expecting to play the Silent Knife, at level 6 it could be worth it to take Dance of Daggers for that bottom action, because it pairs very well with Watch It Burn. You can gain advantage on multiple attacks there. And on top of that, being able to apply wound and immobilize makes you really want to be able to use this in a way that allows you to target at least 3 enemies. Because when you target 3 enemies, you can then move away from the enemies and jump, and guess what? They're immobilized. So they can't chase after you, and they have wound, so they're going to be taking another damage and a couple of damage for the next few rounds until hopefully they die. Then on the bottom of this card, being able to apply or play an extra card out of your hand, it's another unique thing you can do. It's a level 9 card. It should be able to let you do just something that's just stupid, silly, just a fun thing that kind of breaks the game, or at least encourages you to try to find ways to use it to break the game. But it allows you to get extra burst damage off. So not only is it a bottom attack, but it's something that you can play just as an additional card in your round. This you know, the minor side effect from it that can be nice is that it allows you to potentially go into every rest cycle with no cards in hand, which, you know, is just an efficient way to make sure you're using all of your cards all the time. Both halves of this, extremely powerful. In terms of which to take, I mean, it's level 9. Just take whichever one you think is more fun. The Ranged Silent Knife, this is probably the first time where the Ranged Silent Knife doesn't really have a card that jumps out to them. Watch It Burn is maybe a good option just for the fact that, you know, you can still, it's a melee attack on the top there, but you can still get that movement to jump back out of range, so you're not subjecting yourself to a bunch of attacks, so that could be an option. Maybe you also go back and consider taking another card at a lower level, but I kind of hate the idea of like you get to level 9 and you don't take a level 9 card. At that point, maybe just take Hired Help just for the sake of being able to have a fun loss action. Although it's going to be tough for you to want to play that persistent loss action too early because you're already playing Crippling Poison pretty early. So I don't know, not too exciting, honestly, in my opinion, for the Ranged Silent Knife. The Melee Silent Knife, both of these cards are very good. Watch It Burn is probably going to give you a little bit more consistent value, although maybe another way to look at it is if you are in a party with more players, Watch It Burn is probably going to be able to give you more value because you're more likely to be able to target 3 enemies with that top action and just get more damage out and more wound and more immobilized, blah, blah, blah. Whereas if you're in a party with fewer characters, that Disarming 1 is effectively disarming a higher percentage of enemies than it is for larger parties, so that could be a more effective action for smaller parties. And that top action of Hired Help is also going to be more effective for smaller parties too, because you are converting a greater percentage of monsters from the enemy side to your side. So for level 9, pick whichever one you think is more fun. If you're really looking for something to analyze it, then maybe I would base it off of like party size, and Hired Help is better for smaller parties, Watch It Burn is better for larger parties. Next, we'll take a quick look at perks and masteries. The first perks that I would really recommend going for are going to be those first 3, the ones that allow you to remove some of the negative cards, remove 1 -2, remove 2 -1s, and then replace 1 -1 with a +1 card. This effectively allows you to remove all negative cards from your modifier deck except the null, and then you're replacing some of them with +1, so you're reducing the total size of your modifier deck. You're getting more positive cards in there, so at that point you can pretty consistently know that you're going to be dealing at least the amount of damage written on your card, potentially more, and there's a lot of value in that. Next, especially for the melee-focused Silent Knife, I would recommend looking at these perks. The first one I would prioritize really is that last one for the melee, which says, once each scenario during your turn, you may perform Invisible Self. I don't want to understate the importance of being able to just have a turn where you can just say, I'm just going to go invisible. It's not dependent on the ability cards you play. It's not dependent on the modifier cards you draw. It's just either I planned to do this or, oh crap, I'm in a bad situation and I need a good way to get out of it without, say, hurting my positioning too much. Great, just go invisible. That is the perk that I prioritize taking personally after getting those negative modifiers out of my deck. It is also nice to be able to replace 1 +1 card with 1 +1 Invisible Self with a rolling modifier. That can potentially get you out of some bad situations, although you can't really plan on being able to draw that. You're going to draw those invisibility cards more consistently with the Ranged Silent Knife, though the Ranged Silent Knife is not going to be benefiting from that invisibility quite as much as the Melee Silent Knife is. So if you're ranged and you're not really interested in the invisibility as much, the next perk I would probably look at would be replacing 1 +0 with 1 +2 card. You do that twice. That has the potential to increase an attack 2 to an attack 4, which is obviously a 100% increase. I mean, that's a nice chunk of damage. Also, the other perk that the ranged might want to look at would be the add +1 disarm cards, because again, you're going to be doing a lot of attacks. The likelihood that you're going to be getting disarm out is going to be significantly higher than the melee build. Plus, you are less likely to be killing an enemy with your attacks than the melee build is, because you're just doing smaller attacks. So being able to do a small attack and disarm an enemy is going to be very powerful for you. For the melee Silent Knife, this is a little bit less important because you're going to be doing pretty big attacks. And at least me personally, I was really trying to like burst down enemies as quickly as possible. So oftentimes my Silent Knife was the one trying to get the finishing blow off, and just getting a disarm on a modifier draw where you're already killing the enemy is a little disheartening, but it is still a +1, so there's some value in that. Going through some of the other perks that we haven't talked about already, replace 1+0 card with 1+1, gain 1 money token if this attack targeted an adjacent enemy. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more valuable for the melee Silent Knife because you are going to be adjacent to enemies. The ranged Silent Knife is not going to really care about the money part of it. However, the ranged Silent Knife will care about just trying to get rid of some of those neutral modifiers and just continuing to add +1 modifiers because you are going to be drawing them. Going down to the third to last perk, at the end of each of your rests, you may place one of your money tokens in the hex occupied by an enemy within range 3 to perform attack 1, target that enemy at range 3. This is an interesting perk to get later on after you've already gotten a lot of positive modifiers into your deck. Once your attack modifier deck is already looking pretty stacked, because attack 1 by itself at range 3, you're probably not really going to want to be spending a money token for that, even if you might be getting that money token back. However, once you get to a point where you're consistently drawing +1 and +2 for your modifiers, this is an attack 2, maybe an attack 3. But then also for the ranged build, if you have Crippling Poison out, and you're dealing poison with all your attacks, and you're adding +1 to all of your attacks to enemies that are already poisoned, suddenly this attack looks way better. So if you get Crippling Poison, that's when I would start to prioritize that perk. Then the last one that we haven't talked about, whenever you complete a city event, draw an attack modifier card as though you were performing an attack 4, gain an amount of gold equal to the damage dealt, damage that the attack would have dealt. This is obviously going to be better the earlier that you decide to take it, because you are going to be using it more over the life of your Silent Knife. It's also more effective earlier in your Gloomhaven campaign, because this is just the amount of gold that you're going to get from this does scale with your attack value because of your modifier deck. However, it does not scale with the scenario level. And the loot that you pick up during the scenario, you're already going to be picking up a lot of that. And that does obviously scale with scenario level. So being able to get, 3, 4, 5 gold, maybe 5, 6 gold between scenarios is just not going to really be that much compared to the amount of gold that you're probably already picking up throughout the course of the scenario. So if you're going to take it as early as possible. I personally would just prioritize doing damage. For Masteries, you have some Masteries that are relatively easy to complete compared to other classes. Your first Mastery says, in a single scenario, only attack enemies that are adjacent to one of your allies or adjacent to none of their allies and perform at least 10 attacks. The second Mastery is end 3 scenarios with 12 or more money tokens. That first Mastery is something that you are already trying to do anyway, and especially at lower Silent Knife levels, you are really going to be leaning into flanking strike and single out anyway. So it's not too hard to get that first Mastery done within like the first 1 or 2 scenarios that you play as a Silent Knife. If you are focused on it, you may have to forego a few attacks just to make sure that you don't end up trying to attack an enemy that it doesn't meet these criteria. But it's not that bad. It's pretty easy to do 10 attacks in a scenario as well, even like a shorter scenario, because most of your top actions are going to be attacking. The second Mastery and 3 scenarios with 12 or more money tokens in it. Also, I mean, it's going to take at least 3 scenarios for to do, but you have plenty of actions that can get you money tokens. Being able to add +1 to the bottom of Swift Bow is something that is really going to be able to make it easier for you to do this. But just make sure that you are actually getting the 12 money tokens when you try to do it in a scenario, because I am not liable for the friendships that you ruin based off of you saying, oh shoot, I'm sorry, I only got 10 money tokens in this scenario. I'm gonna have to do it again next scenario. I'm sorry. Yeah, you might lose some friends that way. But hey, who needs friends when you have money? Lastly, let's take a look at the solo scenario item. Obviously, spoilers for this if you don't want to see it, but I'm going to talk about it. The item you get from your solo scenario at level 5 is the Silent Stiletto, which is a passive add Pierce 1 to all your attacks. This is fantastic, both for the melee and ranged Silent Knife. I love that this is just great for both of them. It's passive, so you don't have to worry about long resting or doing anything like that to be able to recharge this. Some scenarios, it's not really going to do anything for you, so you can choose to leave it at home. However, in scenarios where you're going to have shielded enemies, which is a lot more common now than it was in the original Gloomhaven, this is going to be fantastic. So that is our Silent Knife. A relatively simple class. You can do melee damage, you can do range damage, but you will be doing a ton of damage. You can do a mix of melee damage and range damage. You have fantastic initiative control, you have fantastic mobility. You get so much money, it's just so much fun to think about like the different things that you can do with all of your enhancements. It is just a ton of fun to play this class. If I play this class again, I'm really interested in trying to do the more ranged focused build because I think that there is a very high ceiling with that. But in both cases, like I said, you are going to be doing a lot of damage and you're going to be doing great things for your party. The melee focused build can melt down single enemies more quickly, and it's probably a little bit better at lower levels than the ranged build. But let me know your thoughts on the class. Were there cards that I did not do enough justice for that you think are better? Are there cards that you think I overvalue? Are there important combinations that you think I missed? Are there builds that I really left out? Whatever it is, let me know what you think. Feedback I get from this one I will use to help me with some of the future class guides that I do. So that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Take care.